Hey, I'm Fristelian, and this is the quick guide to Unholy Death Knight for Battle for Azeroth. Everything should be familiar from Legion, so to get you in the game faster, I'm just going to go through the damage side of things. If you are a new player, here is a short overview of core mechanics. DKs have 6 runes, and spending them generates runic power. You can use all 6, but only 3 will recharge at a time, so make sure they always are. Gameplay works around Festering wounds. Festering Strike applies 2 or 3 wounds, capping at 6. Scourge Strike breaks 1 at a time. You spend the runic power generated with Death Coil, which also has a chance to proc runic corruption, speeding up rune regen. You also have to maintain Virulent Plague with Outbreak, and have a pet ghoul that should always be with you. As for cooldowns, Dark Transformation empowers our pet, and Apocalypse should always be used with 4 wounds. Both are used whenever available or impactful. Army of the Dead is used shortly before combat starts. For AoE, Unholy is very different to other classes. After placing Death and Decay on the ground, standing in it gives you a buff letting your Scourge Strike cleave around your target. This is a very limited time for active AoE, so make sure to prepare runes in advance. Right, let's move on to talents. I'll quickly summarise them, addressing the finer points after. 56, Infected Claws, gives your pet a chance to add a wound. Or Will Serve is an extra pet but doesn't scale with anything useful, so is unlikely to beat its low expectations. Clawing Shadows is a ranged Scourge Strike. 57, Bursting Swords makes wounds AoE. Ebon Fever is a better plague, and Unholy Blight is another dot. 58, Grip of the Dead puts a snare on D&D. Death's Reach is a better grip, and most likely your best choice this tier, and Asphyxiate is a stun. 60, Pestilent Pustules gives runic corruption from wounds. Harbinger of Doom gives more sudden doom procs, and Soul Reaper gives runes and deals some damage. 75, Spell Eater is a better AMS, Wraithwalk is pseudo mobility, but probably your best choice anyway, and Death Pact is a heal that also blocks healing. 90, Pestilence gives D&D a chance to add a wound, putting it on to single target. Defile is a stronger D&D on a shorter cooldown, also putting it single target. Epidemic is runic powered AoE. 100, Army of the Damned reduces your cooldowns. Unholy Frenzy is a haste cooldown with extra wounds, and Summon Gargoyle has its damage increased by runic power spent. Okay, let's look at synergies and talk through how things fit together. We'll build around tier 100, starting with Unholy Frenzy. It's a generic haste cooldown that adds a wound on auto attacks. So the question of the day is, how strong are Festering wounds? If the answer is very, all decisions are made for you, and you simply take everything that has wounds in it. But let's try and assume things are balanced. 56, Infected Claws works well here. All Will Serve has little hope of being used, unless it's been occasionally buffed, and the extra range of Clawing Shadows doesn't really help us because we want to be in melee. 57, Bursting Swords ties in with wounds, but the trouble is that it's mechanically weaker than Ebon Fever, which is also very effective both single target and AoE, making it the better overall choice. Unholy Blight doesn't really offer anything of interest. 60, we are breaking more wounds, so Pestilent Pustules should be a stronger choice than Harbinger of Doom, as that also becomes less useful with more targets. Soul Reaper gives you control of getting runes back, but it has a very long cooldown and is relying on the damage to balance it out. 90, Pestilence ties in with the rest of the wound build and being used single target. Combining it with Pustules means you stand a very good chance of gaining runic corruption during AoE, so it's more forgiving of players who don't prepare properly and start without enough runes. Defile would also be used single target just for its damage, but for AoE it doesn't really work in a wound build. This leaves Epidemic, which is a very strong talent, as it liberates Unholy from stationary, time-limited AoE into wide-ranging sustained AoE, and would be your default choice for things like dungeons. Okay, so let's say we went with a wound build. Infected Claws, Bursting Swords, Pestilent Pustules, and Pestilence. With D&D and Frenzy, we have 2 more cooldowns to use whenever they become available, which is fine during combat. However, in BFA, basically everything is tied to the global cooldown, making cast sequences on pull a little awkward. So let's put something together that's easy to do and will consistently work for everybody. The goal is to put 3 runes down and 4 wounds up as quickly as possible. When using Army of the Dead, it already puts runes down before you start. So precast Army roughly 5 seconds before the pull, and then as you run in, cast Outbreak, Dark Transformation, and Festering Strike. The runes from Army should be back by now, so cast the second Festering Strike to get 4 or more wounds and Apocalypse. Then Unholy Frenzy, and D&D the final rune if using Pestilence or Defile, Gargoyle, and on from there. This open is fairly solid, and can be used with Gargoyle in place of Frenzy, or nothing if using Army of the Damned. If you aren't precasting Army, move Transformation so you make sure to put those first 3 runes down in consecutive casts. Right, moving on to the other two, Army of the Damned simply reduces the cooldown on Apocalypse, so we can immediately point to Harbinger of Doom in the 60, but runes turn into runic power however you get them, so anything works here. Tier 90, Pestilence gives bonus runic power to spend, but is more useful during AoE compared to Epidemic, which is cheaper than Gargoyle but gets the same reduction. As for 56, Infected Claws is bonus runic power, but there's nothing against Clawing Shadows. And 57 is most likely Ebon Fever, but it doesn't care. As for setup, Apocalypse is just 4 wounds, so there is no excuse to miss it. Gargoyle is similar to Army of the Damned with its thirst for runic power, so Harbinger is a sensible choice, but Reaper also has value. As for 90, Gary is single target, and we aren't using pustules, so Pestilence isn't going to be quite as useful, making Defile the only option. If you need AoE, then it's situationally either gaining runic power with Pestilence or spending it with Epidemic. 56 and 57 are as you'd expect. As for setup, we obviously want lots of stuff, so try to start with a stack of wounds and a good amount of runic power beforehand, and if you can, try to hold on to sudden doom proc. That's the main core of talents. The last thing to look at is War Mode, but it gives you bonuses to XP and World Quest rewards, so we're only looking at choices for PvE. The main pick is Necrotic Aura for the increased shadow damage, and then the type of trinket you want is up to you. Second choice is Ghoulish Monstrosity, and the third is either Wandering Plague or Reanimation. And that's all the talents done. Stats wise, due to the new item scaling, you want to take whatever has the highest eye level. Seriously. If you're actually able to choose, then it's Mastery, Crit Haste, Verse. And of course, to do it properly, just sim your character. And that is the end of the guide. If you made it this far, I trust it was useful, so please help others to find it by leaving a like and or a comment. If you're interested in overthinking WoW, or just games in general, please feel free to subscribe. Either way, I hope you have fun in Battle for Azeroth, and thanks for watching.